In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg were unusually warm, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sounds of merchants calling out their goods. Life moved slowly, predictably, until a woman stepped into the marketplace and began to dance. Her name was Frau Trophäa. At first people assumed she was celebrating something, but as minutes turned to hours, it became clear she wasn't stopping. She danced until sweat soaked her clothing. She danced until her feet throbbed. She danced until her legs trembled beneath her. And then, she continued, the next day, she was still dancing, her movements now uneven and frantic. Onlookers felt something between concern and fascination. Some tried to help her, but nothing worked. Frau Trophäa simply continued, compelled by something no one could understand. Within a week, dozens of people joined her. Men, women, even children found their bodies taken over by an uncontrollable rhythm. They danced until their shoes wore thin, until their muscles cramped, until their minds seemed to blur between consciousness and delirium. Doctors at the time believed it was a hot blood condition. City leaders built stages and hired musicians because they thought the dancers simply needed to dance it out, to exhaust whatever force lived inside them. Instead, the number of dancers grew. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some suffered heart attacks. Some simply kept moving without any awareness of where they were or what they were doing. To this day, no one truly knows what caused the dancing plague. Some argue it was mass hysteria brought on by famine and stress. Others believe it was a form of convulsive ergot poisoning caused by mold on rye bread, and others think it was something deeper, almost spiritual, a collective break from reality, a whole city caught in a rhythm no one understood. The dancing eventually stopped. No cure, no explanation, just silence returning to Strasbourg like calm after a storm. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, the vast Siberian wilderness was quiet. The air was still. The forests stretched endlessly, untouched and undisturbed. And then a light appeared. Witnesses described it as brighter than the sun, a streak of fire that cut across the sky with a sound like the ripping of the heavens. At exactly 7:17 a.m., an explosion occurred over the Tunguska River. The force was enormous, estimated to be more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shockwave flattened 80 million trees in a radial pattern, leaving behind a shape that looked like nature had been crushed by a giant hand. But the strange part, there was no crater. The explosion happened in the air, miles above the ground, vaporizing whatever object had entered Earth's atmosphere. For days, dust hovered over Europe. Nights glowed softly, enough for people in London to read newspapers at midnight. When scientists finally investigated years later, they found no meteor fragments, no alien metal, no clear evidence of what had done this, just devastation. Some theories say it was a comet made of ice, melting instantly. Others believe it was a meteor that exploded before impact. And then there are stranger theories, a tiny black hole passing through Earth, an experiment gone wrong from Nikola Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, even the idea of an extraterrestrial craft malfunctioning. But the truth is simple. No one knows. In one of the quietest, most isolated places on Earth, the sky suddenly opened and the world shook from something that arrived silently, without warning. Every year in the small Honduran town of Yoro, something unusual happens. Dark clouds gather, thunder rolls across the sky, and then, during the heaviest rainfall, fish fall from the clouds, small fish, alive, flapping weakly on the ground. The villagers call it Lluvia de Peces, the rain of fish. It has happened for over a century. Scientists have attempted to explain it. One theory says waterspouts, tornado-like columns of water, suck fish from rivers and drop them miles away. But the closest large body of water is far from Yoro, much too far for a simple tornado to carry fish. Another mystery: the fish that fall are not species found in the region's rivers. Some locals believe it's a blessing, a miracle attributed to a missionary who once prayed for the town during a famine. Others just watch the sky and wonder. There is something peaceful and surreal about a quiet village where the rain occasionally brings life instead of taking it away. A town where nature bends the rules gently, softly, like a passing dream. In the early 1930s, Australian farmers faced an unexpected problem. Not drought, not pests, but emus, thousands of them, large, fast, and oddly intelligent birds that migrated inland after breeding season. They trampled fences, destroyed crops, and outsmarted attempts to scare them away. The Australian government decided to send in the military soldiers armed with machine guns deployed against birds. But the emus won. They scattered in small groups, moved too quickly for the soldiers to target effectively, and absorbed gunfire with their surprisingly tough feathers and bodies. At one point, it reportedly took 10 bullets to bring down one emu. The birds outran trucks, dodged ambushes, and made the highly trained soldiers look helpless. After several weeks, the military withdrew, calling it a failure. The emus resumed their lives, wandering peacefully across the fields. It became known, half jokingly and half seriously, as the war Australia lost. In 1991, a historian named Heribert Illig proposed something radical. He argued that nearly 300 years of history never happened. According to him, the years 614 to 911 AD were fabricated. The Middle Ages were partly an illusion. Illig believed the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, along with the Pope, altered calendars to place themselves in the year 1000 for prestige. This would mean Charlemagne didn't exist. The early Middle Ages were exaggerated. Entire wars, rulers, events were created on paper. Most historians reject this idea, but some strange inconsistencies remain. Certain architecture appears more advanced than its supposed era. Some documents from the period contradict each other, and astronomical events recorded then don't perfectly match modern reconstructions. Whether true or not, the phantom time hypothesis reminds us that history is fragile. We trust it because we must, even though much of it is pieced together from fragments. Sometimes the past is not quite as solid as it appears. 9 experienced hikers entered Russia's Ural Mountains in winter. They never returned. When search teams found the campsite, the tent was cut open. From the inside, footprints in the snow, some barefoot, led deep into the forest. The hikers were found scattered. Some suffered broken ribs and skull fractures. Some had radiation on their clothing. One was missing her tongue, yet there were no external wounds on others, as if damage came from a force inside their bodies. Their expressions were frozen in fear. Theories range from avalanche, secret military experiments, infrasound causing panic, a yeti, a missile explosion, or something stranger. The region is now named after the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov, but the mystery remains unsolved. A silent white landscape holding secrets beneath layers of ice and time. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was found drifting in the Atlantic Ocean, sails partly unfurled, cargo untouched, food still on the table, but the crew was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no damage to the ship, no bodies ever found. The last entry in the ship's log was calm and routine. Everything suggested the crew simply vanished. Some theories say a small seaquake caused panic. Others believe a sudden alcohol vapor explosion led the crew to abandon ship temporarily, only to drift away and drown. But the simplest explanation feels incomplete. Too many things were normal, too many clues missing. The Mary Celeste continues to drift through history as one of the sea's quiet enigmas, a ghost ship forever empty. During Japan's Sengoku period, a low-ranking man named Tori Tsunemon volunteered to sneak through enemy lines to request reinforcements. He succeeded but was captured on his way back. The enemy threatened him with execution unless he told his own people to surrender. He agreed. He was placed on a platform, tied, and made to call out toward his castle. But instead of telling them to surrender, he shouted encouragement. He told them reinforcements were coming. He told them to hold strong. He was killed for it, but his bravery inspired the defenders, who fought with renewed determination until help arrived. A simple man, not a noble, not a general, just someone who chose courage and changed a battle. In the year 897, Rome was a city of uneasy silence. The marble walls of churches glowed pale in the morning light, and narrow streets echoed with the soft steps of monks and messengers. But beneath the surface, the city was tense. Political rivalries, feud in families, and shifting alliances filled the air like a storm waiting to break. And in the center of this uneasy landscape was Pope Stephen VI. He had inherited a papacy tangled in old disputes and simmering resentment. Many decisions made by his predecessor, Pope Formosus, still influenced Rome, shaping politics and power in ways Stephen disliked and feared. So Stephen made a decision almost no one believed was possible. He ordered the corpse of Formosus, dead for about 9 months, to be exhumed from its resting place. Pale grave soil was brushed away, bones and rotting cloth lifted from the earth. The body was decayed, fragile, almost collapsing under its own weight. Yet according to Stephen, this was not the end of Formosus' influence. This dead man still had to answer for his supposedly wrongful actions. Servants and clergy dressed the corpse in full papal robes, the rich fabrics, the embroidered stole, the ring on his lifeless finger. It was a bizarre reconstruction of dignity placed over something no longer alive. And then, in a dimly lit hall lined with candles, they seated him on a throne, the hall filled with whispers. Some clergy stared in disbelief. Others looked away, unable to face what was happening. Stephen entered in full ceremony, and the trial began, as if the figure before him were a living defendant and not a lifeless shell. Of course, Formosus could not speak. His head hung forward, the weight of decay pulling him down, so a terrified deacon was appointed to stand beside the corpse and answer questions on its behalf. Stephen's voice rang through the hall. He accused the dead pope of violating church law, of ambition, of betrayal, of acting beyond his authority. The charges were political, complicated, buried in old rivalries. Everyone knew the truth. Stephen wanted to erase Formosus's legacy, to undo his decisions, invalidate his ordinations, and eliminate anyone loyal to him. Still, the trial continued, a long, uncomfortable performance. At times, the corpse had to be propped upright so it wouldn't collapse. The smell of decay drifted through the hall despite the incense. The deacon's voice shook each time he answered for the dead man. Witnesses later said the entire event felt like watching the boundaries of sanity blur. A ritual turned grotesque. A courtroom turned into a stage for cruelty. When it was finally over, Stephen declared Formosus guilty. The verdict was symbolic but devastating. His papacy was invalidated, all his decisions annulled, his robes stripped from his body, the sacred ring torn off his hand. Then, in the ultimate act of disdain, the corpse was dragged out of the church and taken to the banks of the Tiber River. There, it was thrown unceremoniously into the water. For a moment, the river swallowed him, and Rome exhaled, as though something heavy had been removed from the city. But the story didn't end there. Fishermen found the body downstream days later. Locals whispered that it refused to stay buried. Rumors spread that Formosus' death had been avenged by fate, and fear turned against Stephen. Within months, public anger rose. Stephen was arrested, stripped of office, and eventually died in prison, strangled. According to some accounts, the Cadaver Synod became a symbol of the extreme, sometimes surreal nature of medieval politics, a moment when a pope put another pope on trial after death, a moment where justice was demanded from someone who could no longer speak, a moment where the living tried to silence the past but only made it louder, a strange chapter in history echoing quietly through the centuries. World War I was filled with unimaginable suffering, but on one cold Christmas Eve, something unexpected happened. Soldiers from both sides began singing, first softly, then louder. Eventually, they stepped out of their trenches, met in the middle, exchanged small gifts, cigarettes, chocolate, photographs. They played football in the snow. They shared stories, handshakes, moments of peace. For a short time, enemies became humans again. Commanders later forbade such truces. They feared it made soldiers too sympathetic. But for one night, the war paused. Humanity emerged in the quiet space between gunfire. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima for work when the first atomic bomb fell. He survived the blast, burned and injured but alive. He returned home to Nagasaki, and 3 days later, the second bomb detonated. He survived again. His home collapsed. His eardrums ruptured, but he lived a long life afterward, becoming a voice for nuclear disarmament. A man touched twice by history's most destructive invention, yet committed to peace. In 1919, in Boston, a massive storage tank holding millions of liters of molasses burst. A wave of hot molasses, more than 25 feet high, rushed through the streets at nearly 60 kilometers per hour. Buildings collapsed. People were trapped in the sticky flood. Horses, carts, and even entire structures were swept away. It took weeks to clean, and for years afterward, locals claimed the area smelled faintly sweet. especially on hot days, a strange disaster, unexpected and quietly remembered. In 1587, more than 100 settlers established the Roanoke Colony. 3 years later, when a supply ship returned, the colony was gone. Houses dismantled, no bodies, no signs of struggle, only one clue carved into a post: Croatoan. Some believe the settlers joined a nearby native tribe. Others think disease forced them to move, and some believe something darker happened. The truth vanished with the colony, a quiet erasure of lives and stories. In Kazakhstan, the village of Kalachi experienced something surreal. People suddenly fell asleep in the middle of conversations, while walking, while cooking. Some slept for days. When they woke, they felt weak, disoriented, confused. Scientists studied everything: air quality, water, soil, food. Eventually, they discovered elevated carbon monoxide from a Soviet-era uranium mine nearby. But many villagers insist the feeling was different, as if something pulled them gently into unconsciousness, like a velvet curtain closing over their senses, a strange, quiet epidemic. Napoleon Bonaparte once organized a rabbit hunt to celebrate a treaty signing. Hundreds of rabbits were gathered, but when released, they didn't flee. They ran toward him. Dozens of rabbits swarmed him, climbing his clothes, nipping at his boots. More rabbits joined in, until Napoleon and his officers fled to their carriages. He tried to bat them away with riding crops, but they continued advancing. The Emperor of France, defeated by rabbits, a gentle reminder that history is filled not only with grand victories and tragedies, but also absurd, harmless moments. In the year 1814, central London was a maze of narrow streets, brick houses, and small local taverns where workers ended their days with a mug of dark, rich porter. Beer was not just a drink, it was part of daily life, often safer to consume than water, and brewed in enormous quantities. One of the largest producers was the Moo and Company Brewery, located on Tottenham Court Road. Inside the sprawling structure stood massive wooden fermentation vats, towering giants, each held together by long iron hoops wrapped around the thick oak staves. One of these vats, filled with more than 1 million liters of beer, had been groaning for days. The workers noticed it. The wood creaked under the pressure. The metal hoops strained and sang quietly, like a warning whispered beneath the louder sounds of the brewery. But in 1814 it was normal for these vats to bulge. They were enormous, primitive by today's standards, and relied mostly on luck and maintenance to stay intact. No one expected disaster. On the afternoon of October 17th, a single iron hoop snapped. It flew off the vat with a metallic crack that echoed through the building. Before workers could react, the weakened structure failed entirely. The giant vat split open, and in an instant, the entire room became a rushing torrent of dark beer. The pressure from the first vat's collapse caused another nearby vat to burst, adding even more liquid to the catastrophe. Some accounts say 3 vats failed within seconds, releasing a wave of beer so powerful that it destroyed the thick brick wall of the brewery, and then the flood escaped into the streets. The area surrounding the brewery, called the St. Giles Rookery, was a tightly packed neighborhood of poor families, immigrants, and workers living in small, cramped homes. As the wave burst free, beer surged through the streets at frightening speed, some say as high as a man's waist. It slammed into houses, ripped open doors, knocked over walls and flooded basements where families were gathered. Several people were trapped instantly. A mother and her young daughter were taking tea in their home when the wall exploded inward. Others were caught in cellars where the beer rose sharply, leaving no time to escape. Furniture floated, barrels rolled through the streets, crates, clothing, and broken wood spun in a foamy swirl of porter. At first, many residents were confused. Some thought the brewery's vat explosion was an earthquake. Others believed the river had burst its banks. And then, as the dark liquid reached them, people realized it was beer. Some locals tried to save possessions, wading through the sticky flood to retrieve tools, clothing, or personal items. Others, shocked, amazed, or simply opportunistic, attempted to fill cups and pots, drinking the beer as it washed past before it vanished into gutters. Crowds gathered at higher ground, watching the surreal sight of a neighborhood drenched in beer. The smell was overwhelming, thick, sweet, heavy. The scent of alcohol clung to the air for days. When the waters finally receded, the damage became clear. At least 8 people had died, mostly in basements that filled too quickly for escape. Dozens of homes were destroyed, families lost everything, and yet the brewery suffered almost no financial consequences. The reason was simple: the flood was declared an act of God, a strange, unlucky accident, no one to blame. Even more surprisingly, the company petitioned the government to be excused from paying excise tax on the lost beer, and they succeeded. People in the affected area continued to smell porter in their walls and streets for months and for years after. Locals claimed that on hot summer days, the faint scent of fermented malt would rise again from the cobblestones. The London beer flood became one of those historical events that sits between tragedy and bizarre legend, a disaster so unusual that it feels almost unreal, a moment when everyday life was briefly interrupted by something strange, something unexpected, a flood not of water but of beer, a moment that reminds us how strange the past can be, how fragile safety was, and how history is full of episodes that feel more like dreams than reality. And slowly, as the story softens, it settles into the quiet space of night, just another gentle ripple in the long flow of time, a tale from London's past, drifting away like foam on a calm, dark river.